Hey there, Taylor Elwood here, and in response to my previous video I had a comment where the person asked if I could share some specific examples of how I evaluate magical workings in terms of whether they have or haven't worked, and like what ways do I really look at results. And I thought it was an interesting question. So first I want to speak to the results aspect. What I really want to say is that with magic in general, you always get a result. It may not be the result you want, but you always get a result. And you might say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, let's say you do a magical working and you quote-unquote don't get a result at all. That's still a result. It's just that the result is indicative of the fact that what you did clearly didn't work. In general, my approach to magic is that I look toward defining results in order to define the process of magic. And so I try to define the result ahead of time within a certain degree of specificity, and that helps a lot in terms of determining whether or not a magical working, or really just life in general, if things are succeeding. And I'm going to use an example of work with a spirit that I worked with called Bune. I've actually decided not to work with him any further, at least for the meantime. And the reason why is because I would say in my work with him, I've gotten mixed results. When I first started working with him, he had the suggestion that I should open up an additional business. That this, take what I was already doing spiritually and create some classes and things like that. And short term, there was some success. There were some results. I put together some classes and people bought those classes. I would say long term that was really a recipe for disaster. It split my focus way too much between the core business that I was doing and the magical business. I ended up really making the mistake of trying to make the magical business into a core business when I really should have just recognized it as something that was really just a side income at best. And in retrospect, I would say that I really would say the short-term success wasn't worth the long-term detriment. And what I found is that, while Bune would have sometimes some good business advice, what I also found was that it would also lead into some situations that weren't necessarily as effective as I would hope. As an example, one bit of advice that Bune had was that, oh, hey, go check out this online conference, and I checked it out, and there was some online. It was a conference all about online marketing, and it was how I basically got into my disastrous situation with online marketing. And in the end, it was my choice. I was the one who chose to sign up for the classes and everything else. But when I look at the work with Bune, what I would see is that there would be some short-term benefit to the advice, but some long-term detriment. And this was a pattern that I saw again and again and again. And I'm not going to say that that's true of all my work with the Goetia, because I have worked with some of the Goetia and had some very wonderful relationships. Prasan, for example, is a good example of that, where the results have been consistently good. But I think that, in this case, what I saw was that here was this result that was occurring where I was having a short-term benefit but a long-term detrimental effect, and this was happening when I really looked at it, took a good hard look at it, and I would say really just it was in October, November of this last year is when I really took a good hard look at it. I was like, I need to look at everything and why everything isn't working, and that was one of the things that I saw didn't work. So I think that when you look at your results in terms of your magical workings, you want to look and see if there's a pattern there, because if there's a pattern, that can be indicative of things that aren't working. And at the same time, you also want to look at that. You also want to look at it in terms of a pattern of things that are working. So I'll use another example where, I've been developing this working with archangels and with the elemental archangels, but also with three additional archangels. And what was fascinating was, in particular, with one of them. That archangel by the name of Savuviel, I found references to him in William G. Gray's works, But then I started to have some synchronicities occur as I continued to go deeper into that working, where other people basically came forward and shared their own experiences or content or relevant material. And it just kind of further confirmed the work that I was doing, and it led to some very useful, it pointed me in some very useful directions that I'm currently exploring. And I see that as an example of where a result can kind of be like a road sign, where it's kind of pointing you to where you need to go. It's saying like, hey, you're going in the right direction, and keep going that way, and you're going to get to where you want to go. And so I'm continuing to pursue that work. I'm not going to really talk about it any further. There's a lot of stuff going on with it that I really can't speak to, but so I'll leave it at that. But I will just say the synchronicities really spoke to me on a very interesting level, because it just kind of pointed to the fact that certain things were coming together in the way that I hoped they would. I would also say that in general that I find that when you look at results, you have to look at the mundane side of things too. Like, what are you doing right now in order to help you generate the result that you're going for? And in my particular case, I would say that when I've done workings, that I've always tried to match the physical or the mundane actions with the magical actions. And so what I'll find sometimes is that if the mundane actions aren't working out, it's actually a good indicator that the magical work isn't happening either, because really the magical work and the mundane work should feed into each other and support each other and make things easier for each other. And if they're not, if things are getting harder, that's an indicator that things aren't working the way you want them to. I would say finally that another way that you can really look at whether or not your magical work is working is to really take a good hard look at yourself. We can lie to ourselves sometimes. I would say that one of the things that I fell prey to and really caused a fair amount of self-delusion on my part was the sin of pride. I let pride get in my way in some ways. I got caught up in this idea of how things should be working and what should be happening. And so instead of really taking a good hard look at what was actually happening, I just kept going down this rabbit hole about like how things should be working. It should be this way because et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I let myself get blinded to the reality of what I was dealing with. And I want you to note one key thing here. And this is really important. When you're doing magical work, and really in life in general, any situation where things aren't working, the first place you have to look is at yourself, okay? You have to be willing to take responsibility for yourself. I'm not saying there aren't external situations that don't contribute, because sometimes there are. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to be you. And even that 10th time, there's going to at least be an element of you that's causing things not to work. And I think that a lot of people get, a lot of the ways we lie to ourselves sometimes is we get so caught up in pointing the finger at everything else that we don't point it at ourselves and take that good hard look at ourselves. So that's just a suggestion I have for any of you who are watching this and thinking about your own magical practices. Just take a good hard look at yourself. Are you being honest with yourself about what is or isn't working and why? Look to the results, but also look to how you're showing up in your magical work and in your mundane work and everything else, because that right there is an indicator as to what is or isn't working. And a lot of times we don't pay attention to those kinds of things. And so I just want to share that with you from a place of hard-earned experience. I would say that I've really learned this all over again. And I needed to learn it all over again. And, that's just part of life. So take that in stride and have a wonderful evening and take care. Oh, and remember to check out the link at the bottom of the description. If you found this video helpful in any way, shape, or form, then please do donate, because your donations do support my content creation and are what allow me to continue to help you with your own spiritual path. All right, thanks and take care.